Hey there, Ryan McDonald here with Rootly on Humans of Reliability. Super excited today to have Mark Quigley join us from 90. Really excited to dig into his wealth of knowledge about platform engineering, AI, and just how remote work has shifted and changed over time, and some of the observations he's had and experiences he's had digging into this space. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. If you could just give us a quick intro. Why reliability? Why platform engineering? Why are you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, like you say, I'm head of platform engineering at 90 now. I recently come from Wayfair and a collection of other places before that. And so why platform engineering? The answer to that is probably going to resonate with a lot of folks. And the answer is because it needed to be done. And at some point, you get to a place where you're like, it could be done better. And so you start to do it better. And the next thing you know, you're trusted with leading the way and running the show for the whole of things. So that's at least how I found myself getting involved in platform engineering is leaning into there has to be a better way. And then once we find the better way, suddenly everybody wants you to do it. Recently, that's been exactly what I've been hired for as opposed to stumbling into it. But that's where I got my start. And I suspect that's where a lot of people get their start too. That we're all hired as full stack engineers. We're growing up through the ranks and we see it. There's a better way. So
Totally. Yeah,
yeah.
even in my career as well. It was like feeling the need, and like being drawn to it as opposed to like, I am a platform engineer at heart, right? No, it's like, there's a burning problem, right? And like a lot of engineers sort of running to that, it sounds like. So,
Yeah, but then
um,
once you get into it, you become a platform engineer at harder, at least. It's hard not to.
awesome. Well, we're super stoked to have you today. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here with a couple questions.
Yeah.
So could you give me like an elevator pitch? What's 90? What does 90 do? How does 90 help folks?
For my fellow engineers out in the world, here's the best way to think of it. Along came things like source control, IDEs, and all of these tools to help us be the best engineers we could be. 90 gives all of that to a business, right? So when you think about small businesses starting, almost always they're started from a point of passion, right? Somebody says, I really love doing the work of X, or I'm really good at doing the work of X. And they decide to create a business around it, right? Like, I'm sick of working for somebody else. I'm going to start my own business to do this. Or, hey, I've seen that better way. I know how to do this. I'm going to found a company that's going to help bring this to the world, right? What that means is these folks are almost always really good at whatever that thing X is, and they may not know how to run a business fully. That may be a new skill that they're growing at this time. So what we see is a lot of folks navigating that without a lot of clear guidance. And you can go out into the market and hire small business coaches and executive coaches, which is great. We love the coaches that we partner with. But you can also just pick up 90 and we can help you get to running a business well quickly, which means you can focus on bringing that passion to the world. So we are a business operating system for folks. Really, what that means is let's give you all the ways to be excellent at running a business while you're pursuing the passion.
Nice. I really like that. And it seems like remote and hybrid are the areas that you shine. Like those are the spaces that you really help enable folks to dig into and to like become, sort of different instant experts, right? Instead of having to go read the book and like learn everything, right? It sounds like you all just give folks the ability to kind of like show up and have a really great framework. Is that right?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, we're going to help across every aspect of the business, and being remote or hybrid is one of those aspects. But we ourselves are remote first, and it's something that we're going to lean into and really, really make excellent. So there's a huge debate in the world, especially in the world of engineering right now, around return to office versus remote first. We're putting a stake in the ground on the remote first side of that. Now, that comes with challenges, which is why a lot of companies are driving people back into the office. But it's naive to think those challenges can't be solved and that being in an office is the only way to solve them.
Given that, I guess, what do you think are the most important pillars? Like, what are the critical factors that you think make distributive teams more effective and
Yeah.
ideally, I guess, more reliable too, right? Because I think that is sort of nestled into that idea is that you get more out of people, you get better out of people, and consequently, you probably have more reliable software. You have a more reliable service for your customers.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, reliability is a factor of how well we work together. So if we think about the massive percentage of any kind of incident or failure situation is change induced, right? Well, changes are people working, and if they're not working together, there's more odds that we're going to have a change induced issue, right? So what are the pillars? It starts with communication, and then the second one is probably communication, and the third one is the C. I'm going to go with communication.
The 3 C's, I like it.
The 3 C's, right? So the key here is in a place where you're breathing the same oxygen, right? A lot of that comes for free. And that's why this is the pillar, right? There's so many pillars to work. We think of competency, we think of capability, capacity, we think of other C's, sticking to a theme here. But look, when you're remote, communication is the thing that you always used to get for free, and now you have to work on. And it's weird and natural or intuitive to folks. And so that's why it failed, right? And so you think, oh, I don't want to start another meeting. But you got to realize in an office, you'd be casually meeting with people for how many hours a week? Sure, 5, 15, 20-minute chunks. But like, oh, let's go to lunch, standing around the water cooler, the 5 minutes before a meeting starts, the 15 minutes when it ends early. And sometimes real things come up in that. You solve issues, you find opportunity for innovation. So when you're fully remote, you need to be intentional about engineering those into your process. And that is almost always going to be being on calls a little bit more often than you might, but don't let your bias from the office days dissuade you, right? Talking to people is called working with people. It's what we do. Now, focus time is important. Don't let me too much erode that. But
Sure.
Intentionally engineer when you're gonna have both structured and unstructured time to talk to your folks.
Do you have any like deployable hot tips for like how do you make those informal times better? Because I feel like I've seen a spectrum, right, where it's like we're gonna get together and we're gonna play games, right? Or like we just have a standing happy hour. Are there any tools? Are there any sort of mechanisms that you found that like really helped make that time helpful for the team? Now, I don't want to say productive necessarily, because the goal isn't to like have an agenda and drive something out, but the goal is to, have that great face-to-face time. Is there anything that has worked particularly well for you at 90?
Yeah, well, so see, that's the problem, right? Is when you say we're going to get together and play games or have a happy hour or whatever, do those things. They're fun. They build trust amongst humans. They're important, but they're not what I'm talking about, because those have an agenda, right? The game is the agenda. The snacks are the agenda. The drinks are the agenda. Whatever. So it's really critical to have direct, unstructured time with your peers. If you're a people leader, you're the people who are reporting to you, and to your manager and stakeholders. So, we talked about weekly one-on-ones and how important they are. And by the way, 90, one of the things we'll do is we'll help you bring a really well-structured, what we call L10 or level 10 meeting, because we rate them and we want to get the 10 rating. We can help you bring a really structured weekly meeting for your team. This is where you're going to get all that structured goodness. You're going to talk about issues. You're going to assign to-dos. We're going to make you vastly more productive with this. But on the flip side, you want to have some time where you can have an unstructured conversation with somebody, because the things that arise in there are the things that are problem discovery, solution discovery, and innovation, right? Nobody's going to set an agenda of, let's think of the 5 things we're going to innovate on, or if they do, it's not going to work, right? Because that's not how innovation happens. But when you're talking to somebody and you say, man, this sucks, and they say, actually, I have an idea. And then you go, well, I have an improvement to your idea. And suddenly you've got something to run with. So you find those in the unstructured time. So it's important to have both. So the deployable solution
I like
is
that.
Intentionally arrange unstructured time with peers, reports, and stakeholders and managers.
I like that. I like that a lot. You mentioned something that it sounds like 90 helps facilitate, and that it's that notion of the L10 meeting, of applying a metric to a meeting. And I know earlier we had chatted a little bit about using something like NPS as a productivity metric, something like Spotify uses. I guess I'm curious, like what is your take on measuring not only developer productivity, right? But it sounds like 90 also helps you measure your process in some ways, which is cool and sort of a step out, like almost a meta level measurement, which is pretty interesting to me. So I guess what's your take on we'll start with just like measuring meetings, and then we could shift into like measuring developer productivity as made more accessible through platform engineering.
Yeah, there's two core things I think about. I think it was Ford, I might be misquoting this, who at one point said, what gets measured gets improved. And there's a story of going to a steel factory and saying, how many units of steel did the day shift measure or produce? And he didn't actually have the strongest opinion of what that number should be. But they said, oh, six. What do 6 lots of steel or whatever that was. So he wrote 6 on the ground at Big Shock. By the way, I'm mangling this story. Google it, you'll get a better version. Yeah. And then the night shift comes in, right? And they see this big number 6 written on the ground. And they're thinking, well, if the day shift could do 6, we can do 7. And so they did 7, and they wrote a big 7 on the ground. Ha, we got you guys, right? Well, the day shift wasn't having it. And the number goes up and up and up, and soon it goes up by increments larger than 1 because they gotta stay ahead of the race. And productivity tripled. All it took was writing the number on the ground. So what gets measured gets improved. And then the second one, the corollary to that, the countervailing thought, is Goodhart's law, which says any measurement that becomes a target ceases to be a good measurement. So you have to thread the needle between these two things with metrics, right? Are you looking to understand, in which case don't make it a target, leave it a measurement. Goodhart's law is a law. It's not, an idea. On the other hand, if you're trying to get movement, make that measurement a target, and people will move against those targets. It's just something in our natural competitive nature that says, I bet I can beat that, and it's kind of fun, right? Like the day shift was like, haha, we got you guys. And the night shift, haha, we got you guys. It's all in good spirit. So the key is dialing in on what metrics are you looking to move? What are you trying to understand? And which are just noise to the system? Now, for engineering, this gets real simple. And by the way, 90 we have a whole great way for you to bring the metrics that matter into your business, into the operating of your business. We call it the scorecard. You're able to bring in all kinds of metrics from wherever you find them and whatever metrics make sense to you. But we don't specifically tackle engineering metrics. Here's the ones I recommend, though, if you're in this space. First off, start with DORA. There's a lot of backing that says if you move the DORA metrics, you're going to move the business. And that matters a lot. And then you can look at all kinds of other metrics around that. There's been a lot of evolution around the space of DORA since the book Accelerate came out, whether that's space or DevX or whatever. All of them are trying to solve a problem that I think can be solved very simple. Developer NPS, that's what you started with. Let's talk about that. It is a gift of the universe that there's an extremely high correlation between what makes engineers happy and what makes engineers productive. Those two things happen to be the same thing. Now, nothing in the universe said it had to be that way, but we're lucky that it is, because that means that if I can focus on making my engineers happy, I'm treating them well as human beings, which we love. We like treating humans really well. That's a little bit about what Work 9.0 is about, is how do we engage the human in the experience. And the flip side of that is it makes them productive. So the correlation says, hey, I can get both of these wins with the same effort. The reason why is engineers like solving problems. It's what they do. It's why they became an engineer in the first place. It's not why they got a job as an engineer. It's why they became an engineer in the first place. So if you can put a challenging problem in front of an engineer, if you can give them the freedom and agency to go after that problem and the solution, and then the key is, at first this will rub people the wrong way, but once you get it, you get it. Hold them accountable for getting that solution and actually achieving the result. That's important to us as human beings. Work is an intrinsic motivating part of our identity and our motivation in life. So that accountability is the key at the end there. If you can give those 3 things to an engineer, and of course maybe the tools or whatever to implement solutions, you're going to get both happier devs and more productive devs. And NPS is a great way to find out, where are they missing a tool? Where is agency not available to them? Where is accountability weak and causing unnecessary ambiguity, right? So aligning agency and accountability, you're going to make your devs happy and productive.
Like that. And to go back to the beginning, you had mentioned in terms of developer metrics, the notion of DORA. And I think one of the biggest problems, right, that I see with metrics is that notion of metrics becoming goals necessarily, right? And I love the fact that DORA has like some really good balanced metrics, right? And that you can't necessarily over rotate on one without impacting the other. And I think that perspective is something that has been missing, I think, or had been missing for a long time. And it's great to see more and more folks like kind of drive into that space. And I see a parallel with the NPS where you have, happiness and productivity, right? engineers are happy when they're productive when they're happy, right? And it's, so you sort of like have that balance as well. I like the parallels there between those two thoughts.
Yeah,
I
and there'll be
guess,
times when you don't find that balance, and then the key there is often the thing you're actually trying to get is the through line between two guardrails, right? So countervailing metrics are super valuable. So when you think about how do I approach NPS, how do I approach DORA? Because one of the things that the book Accelerate doesn't tell you how to do is how to make your DORA scores better, right? So the key is those are trailing metrics, right? By the time you know if they're good or bad, it's too late to change them for the week, the quarter, the whatever. So find leading indicators, like how many pull requests per engineer is a good leading indicator. It's a bad. This is a measure, not a target, but it's a good leading indicator of like, are your DORA metrics going to move in the right direction? And then if that's low, you can be like, well, why is it low? Oh, because we've got this horrendous change approval board that slows everything down. Maybe we should refactor or eliminate that, right? The through line is going to be between two metrics. So measuring PRs by engineer is really dangerously close to measuring lines of code. That's a bad target. Keep it a measure, not a target.
right.
And changes, appropriately reviewed, appropriately tested, that can lead to over indulging in coverance and the change control boards to bring everything to a crawl, right? So over focusing, over targeting on safety. The through line is between them. So countervailing metrics, when they're put up in balanced opposition, give you a really nice through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess I'm quite curious. Like you mentioned the idea of having something simply be a measure and not be a target. I've seen so many times where people say that and then like the goalposts shift, right? And all of a sudden your measurement, maybe it was a target, or maybe now we're thinking of it as a target. How do you like make space between those two concepts and make it clear to folks that this is literally just a measure? I have some ideas, but I don't know if I don't know how well they land. So I'm curious to hear yours first. Then I'll share mine.
I'll give you mine first, but I'm curious about yours too. We all will learn something here. The way I do it is, first off, I think when you start to publish the measure broadly, when you publish it raw, you don't publish any conclusions or abstractions from it. You're just outing it to the world. It's going to become a target, right? And it comes back to that six drawn in chalk on the floor, right? That immediately became a target because he put it there for everybody to see. Now, so I'm not saying hide the measurement, but I think of in all data, there's a pyramid of value where at the bottom, the most data you have is your raw data, but it has the least value. Don't hear me say valueless. Data is the new oil after all, but the least value. And so then what we do is we clean that data up. We take out outliers, we take out noise, et cetera, so we have refined data. Then we have aggregates, right? What is the sum? What is the count? What is the average? What is the mean? Then we have conclusory kind of stuff, the trend lines, right? But then we have at the top insight. And this is where we say actionability, right? So we say, because of this trend line, you should go do that. And that's sort of like you have the least amount of that because it takes a lot of effort to produce it, but it's at the top of that pyramid where you say, there's the real value. That's what data is meant to get you to. So you want to keep your measures a little bit lower down, and then you want to make your targets surface a little higher up that pyramid.
Nice. I think that is a much more elegant way of saying what I was going to say, which was hide it, which I don't love, right? Like, I don't like the idea of like, just like, I'm going to squirrel this data away and like only our team is going to look at it. But I felt like I started with everyone should get all of the data. And then eventually I was like, you know what? You don't actually, people outside of this group probably don't need that. That is not a helpful thing, and it is too easily weaponized or misinterpreted or not analyzed or put in context for someone else. So I love the way that you describe that of there is a whole process before something should be written on the floor of the factory, right? As opposed to just, I will write out any numbers that I would like.
Yeah, don't mistake the power of writing the number immediately on the floor, right? If you know something should be a target, write the target down. Like, you don't have to do any analysis, so therefore no analysis paralysis. Just do it. But be careful because that's a target now. So think about like, or if not pre-think, then at least observe what are the knock-on effects of people pursuing that target relentlessly, right? Hey, I'm going to pay engineers to fix bugs. Oh, well, guess what? Now they're engineering bugs that then they fix so they can get that bonus. Like, so think about those knock-on effects, right? Hide it is a great answer to prevent the weaponization, but it stops at the halfway point. The way to finish that is, okay, but now I still need to give the value to the world. So how do I refine that data into value that carries with it context, conclusions, etc.? And that's that insight at the top of the pyramid.
No, I love that. And I think for us, it was hide it and then inform our work. And I think for me, there are parallels between something like a platform engineering group and an incident command group, and that you're a hub in the organization. You're going to touch a lot of other teams, right? So for us, it was like, if we can use that data to change our group of 6 or 8 people's behavior, like we can then sort of broadcast out some of the changes that we were looking for. So it was like we did that organically and not intentionally. The process you described of like, now take it and make sure that it actually like comes back and helps the business. The way that you describe that is definitely like, I'm going to go draw that on a whiteboard when I'm done here. That's a good way to think about it.
I'll send you a JPEG.
Lovely. Thank you. Save me some bad whiteboard art. So at Wayfair, you mentioned that you adopted a feature management system that helped improve reliability and scalability. Can you share some of the key lessons that you took away from that and how you're taking those forward into your role at 90?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, there's so many practical lessons that we can take from that specific project around not letting tech debt get way out ahead of you. Feature toggles when they become unused, or time bombs and stuff like that. But you asked about the key lessons, and I think that those practicalities are interesting, but they're not a key lesson. The key lesson was really about 2 things. One, how do we draw a line between code deployment and feature release? As engineers, it's really important for our feedback loops and our ability to progress work very quickly and at high quality that we get a very rapid feedback loop. We deploy, we see it, we deploy, we see it, right? Customers may not be ready for that level of rapid change, whether it's on a B2C business like Wayfair was, where we need to do A/B testing and some other long tail processes, or in a B2C environment where every change you make impacts us. Like at 90, every change we make impacts our clients directly. They feel that, and so it's no fun having to work in a system where it's changing all the freaking time, right? So we want to make sure that our product team is measuring the cadence of change and adapting to our clients' expectations there. So how do we deploy all the time and not change things all the time? And feature toggles allow you to divorce that. But the other interesting part about that project that I think is worth calling out is when you're engaging in any engineering project, whether it's feature toggles or reliability or cloud compute and hyperscaling or whatever it may be, it's so important to have all of the folks you work with be incredible partners to you. So I'll give a quick shout out to Unleashed, a company out there in the world, for being incredible partners in the feature toggle space. And that made a huge difference because those tools are not solving my specific problem. They're meant to solve any problem a feature toggle could solve. That partnership is how we and they work together to optimize that down to the specific solution that we have. And so on the reliability front, early days of us being a Rootly customer, but that's one of the things I'm really excited about is how strong the partnership appears to be from the get-go here.
So it really sounds like making sure that you both have good tooling, if I'm understanding correctly. And then like we've talked about earlier, there's just the notion of communication too. Like it sounds like you're sort of interleaving those 2 threads of like, if you don't have the communication and if you don't have the alignment, but you also don't have the ability to actually go flip things and keep those things current, that you're just going to end up in a rough spot.
Yeah, and then there's a specific flavor of communication when you're dealing with outside entities. So companies that are part of your tech stack in your dependency chain, but that aren't part of your company. And that is, they know where they're trying to take things, and you know where you're trying to take things. And getting alignment between those 2 things is super important. And that only happens when that outside entity is acting in partnership with you. Some companies do that extraordinarily well. Some, frankly, do a terrible job of it. My prediction, look a decade forward, and the companies that we're still talking about really want to do it well.
And I know at Rootly, that's been a huge priority for us, is like we look at almost every customer as a partner and do try to leverage technology to make it such that, even if the changes that we're making don't align perfectly with everyone, that there's optionality, right? So people really can opt into features as opposed to just have them forced because now is the time. The product manager decided now is the time to flip the switch. So that resonates in a really real way in terms of just how Rootly functions and how I feel like, successful organizations, successful SaaS organizations are plugging into folks' stack. So I love that. Awesome. I'd love to take a second here and change gears. You've been engineering for a long time. You moved up the ranks as a principal engineer, it sounded like, into management, and then now are thinking, it seems like, even more comprehensively as the head of a platform engineering group. I'm curious, what have you seen change and evolve over your time in the seat here, working these roles?
Oh, I mean, so much change without dating myself too much. I mean, the internet itself, right? Then we see the rise of hyperscaling and cloud, which parallels but doesn't mimic returning to sort of centralized compute of the mainframe days. And now we're seeing the rise of AI, which I think is really exciting because I think it's at a minimum as fundamentally impactful as the internet. And on the upside of the minimum, it's going to be more impactful than the internet. So real quick, the reason I think that is the internet said we're going to make information available we're going to remove the scalability factor on information. Information is now 100% scalable. Everybody can have everything. AI is going to do that for work. It's going to make work infinitely scalable. It already is in cases that I myself have demonstrated, right? So we can talk about that. But it's going to increasingly become easier to make it work infinitely scalable. People who are weighing in on the ethics side of this, the alignment problem, are worth listening to because that scalability can have amazing, world-changing, utopic outcomes, or it can have amazing, incredible, dystopic outcomes. And I think it's on us to decide which of those roads we're going to travel. But the potential is what I'm talking about. It's amazingly huge.
You mentioned sort of the scaling of work, and I'm curious at 90.io, like what practices, what are some rubber meets the road practices that you all are bringing to play in how you're working day to day? Like, how are you seeing AI like foundationally change the way that you're working?
Yeah, there's two ways to answer that. What are we ourselves using, and what are we bringing to ourselves and our clients, right? So what are we ourselves using right now? We're already deeply invested in things like, Copilot for helping us do code faster and better. There's upsides and downsides to everything. So don't hear this as everything's better. You've got to watch out for things like Copilot introducing duplicate code across multiple services, which, if that code is impactful to the business, could cause feature drift, right? So you got to be cautious in how you go about this. But look, that's just a new problem to solve. The impact on productivity is worth solving that problem.
I feel like it also points to the fact of like how important humans are, right? Like if human judgment is not the foundation of a lot of this, like AI is not necessarily replacing jobs, right? It is augmenting, I think, when done really well. But I just wanted to plug that really quick. I'm super interested to hear what you guys are up to at Wayfair.
Yeah, so the augmentation thing, real quick, that's how we choose the utopic path, right? If we are in this magical future where we have one or more AI assistants helping us do all the things we want to do it all the time, that's the utopia. That's amazing, right? Who wouldn't love an army of workers at their beck and call to help them achieve whatever they want to achieve? The dystopia is AI is used to replace people in human judgment in ways that are good for a few and bad for many, right? Now, there's a gray zone where AI can replace humans in a way that's good, net positive for the many. And I think we'll have to explore those carefully with ethicists at our side. But let's focus on the utopic route. We want to lean our energies into that. So at Wayfair, we were measuring the efficacy of these coding tools. And, this was back in, say, June of last year. They've only gotten better since then, right? When we ran those measurements, one of the things we said to our board at the time was, these are the worst these tools will ever be. And that has been proven true over and over again. Claude has caught up to GPT and exceeded it on coding capabilities. The O1 models are really cool. So there's this race and it's going to benefit us all. But we found that even in June of last year, productivity gains were solidly in the 13 to 22% range. Now, you'll see some, Microsoft and GitHub release some data around like 40% productivity gains. What they're measuring is time saved, right? And if you think about it, every time you save somebody a block of time, they're going to spend some of that time doing something productive. They're going to spend some of that time doing something explorative, which is still good for the business, to be clear. And they're going to spend some of that time doing something that isn't for the business, just for themselves. And that's okay. They're happier people when that happens. So you're never going to get the full block of time back to productivity. So if we're seeing a 13 to 18% productivity gain, a 22% productivity gain, what we're seeing is likely a 40% time saved, a double that number time saved.
If I were starting from scratch, or like you mentioned this before, of like, hey, like if I'm doing this from the beginning, if I wanted to implement using some of these tools and to start measuring time saved, like what are some advice, like bits and pieces that you would recommend as jumping off points for people? Because I think that it can feel intimidating, right? You hear about everyone who's saving all this time, and then going back to metrics, it's like, cool, but how do I prove that? How do I measure the value of some of these tools that I'm deploying? So would love to your take on that.
Well, one of the traps that I'm constantly boggled by. You get into this situation where you go to a executive group and you say, hey, I did some rough measurements. They didn't take me any time. Like we just wrote down how much time did we save every day. And it turns out that the number is like we saved, 2 hours a day, whatever. And this is through a combination of tools, right? Like you're going to save some of that with Copilot. You're going to save some of that through ChatGPT directly. You're going to save some of that through, Gemini integration with Docs and Gmail and so forth, right? But let's say you go to your test, you say, hey, I saved 2 hours a day. And they're like, well, how do you know that? And you say, well, here's the measurement. And they're like, well, yeah, but was it really 2 hours a day, or was it, a minute 45, or could it have been 2:15? Like, how do you know? Prove it. What are we doing, right? Who cares? Let's say it was 60 minutes a day. Who wouldn't gain an extra hour a day from every employee in the organization? Like, why are we debating this? It's like, don't do this, right? So one of the other things when you get back to metrics and measurements, you have to think about the level of fidelity that's relevant, right? If you're able to double your productivity on something, for instance, don't quibble over whether it's 1.9 or 2.1. Who cares? Spend your energy getting that double, right? Now, if you're like, well, we're not sure if this is increasing productivity by 0.5% or 0.1%, maybe it's worth measuring to know, right? But like when you're seeing orders of magnitude leaps, just take the leap. Quit debating it.
I'm curious, is that the same? And this shifts back to earlier in our conversation of like, in terms of coaching businesses and helping people, get the most out of their business operating system. Is that how you would frame that for leadership, or do you have any other like ways that you think about framing those types of metrics quibbles, right? Because I've encountered that so many times where they're like, well, how sure are you? And you're like, well, I could go spend another couple weeks and have like a 99% like whatever, but like, do we need that, right? Are we sending a rocket to the moon, or are we tuning our CI/CD pipeline here, right?
Yeah, you clearly hit a hot button with me, so sorry. I'll put on the executive math here for a second. Okay, yeah. The way I would explain this to leaders calmly and succinctly is this: what fidelity of data helps us make a good decision, right? Because clearly the value comes in having made the good decision as quickly as possible, right? If we could just snap our fingers and know which decision is right, then we could just make it. If measurements aren't helping us make a better decision, they might be a waste of time, right? They're sometimes not, because you'll make future decisions with it. But really, the value of a decision of a measurement comes in, making that decision, setting that target, whatever, right?
Stockpiling data has rarely helped anybody. It just turns into the junk drawer, right? Of like,
yeah, because it's at the bottom of that pyramid we talked about earlier, right? How do we get further up the top? That takes work. So the question is, what fidelity of data do you need to make a good decision? And when you're talking about, do I accept what is somewhere between a 1 and 3%, 100 and 300% increase in productivity, or don't I? You don't need much data at all. The answer is yes, you do. If it's 100% productivity gain, great. If it's 300%, pop a cork. But either way, you're going to do it. So you need very, very, very little data to say we should do this. Now, once you've done it, then you might want to get into, How do we really optimize it? How do we get closer to that 300 number than the 100 number? There's value there, right? I mean, like you're talking an entire doubling again. So what metrics, what fidelity of data will help you go from 100% to 200%, 200 to 250, 250 to 275, right? You're going to find it harder and harder as you approach the tail. You're going to need more information to figure out how you move that chart up. But the fidelity is going to go from like nothing to maybe a lot. But don't start with a lot. Start with the minimum you need to make that decision.
That is sage advice. I wish I knew that I wish I had that talk track several years ago for sure.
Yeah, there's some scars to go along with that one.
It sounds hard earned for sure. Awesome. We're getting close to the end here. One last question for you. So 90's founder has talked about the notion of work 9.0. I'm curious if you could just give us sort of a quick peek. Like, what does that mean, and what does this next generation of work that 90 ideally helps facilitate look like?
Yeah, and I can give you a quick peek, but the thing is, Mark Abbott, our founder, is an incredibly smart human being who has put a lot of thought into this. So I'm going to encourage everybody first and foremost to seek this from the source, right? Because the source is a good one. But a quick peek and a quick preview. Work 9.0 is about how do we really adapt work to the age that we're living in, right? So if you think about what work was like back when we were inventing agriculture, it was toil, and that's how you got from not having it to having it. You wanted food in your pantry, you toiled away and dug in the ground and planted seeds, and you worked long and hard and all the time. So the question isn't how do we work less, but it's like what pattern of work fits the age that we're living in now. And whether that's leaning into a remote first organization or the structure that 90 can bring to your business, those are all going to be aspects of it. Hopefully I've gotten everybody intrigued and left you wanting more. And I'm going to say, go to the source. Let's get Mark on this topic because he can speak to it more eloquently than I ever could.
Fantastic. I guess as a final question for you before we wrap up, given that we talked about metrics, we didn't dig into incident metrics, which is a favorite / least favorite topic of mine. If you can have a topic that you both love to talk about and despise at the same time, I'm curious, what would you say are your most important incident metrics?
Yeah, interestingly, there's a debate in the market right now around, do you ignore MTTR and focus on preventing a whole bunch of incidents, error budgets, and things like that, SLOs, or do you lean all the way into MTTR? And again, we talked about how sometimes the thing you're looking for is the through line between them, and I think that's the case here. So look, you can't control everything. Incidents are going to happen. Therefore, all the MTTs matter. Time to detect, time to resolve, time to inform. I like to add time to eliminate. What are those elimination tasks you're going to add in a postmortem or something like that to make sure that we're not getting a whole bunch of repeats. But look, you're never going to grow a business. All you're doing is fighting fires. So SLOs, error budgets, all of these gems of wisdom that come out of the Google's SRE handbook, those are still incredibly valuable. So you asked what metrics, and I'm going to say what measures and targets. So the measures, I like to measure things like what are my, SLIs, what are my indicators and all of that. I like to measure all of the MTTTs. My targets are going to be on one side, the error budget. Are we staying within it or not? And what are the consequences of exceeding an error budget? And the target on the other side is MTTR. So we can't resolve things that we haven't been informed of. We can't be informed of them if we haven't detected them. So MTTD, MTTI, those are going to fall into MTTR. So the targets are MTTR and error budgets. And I think if you combine those two targets, you get a nice countervailing force where the through line gets you where you want to be.
I really like that answer. And given our conversation before, I was sure that you were going to have some really sage wisdom, some good insight on how to thread that needle. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Mark, on Humans Reliability. Really appreciated your perspective, sharing about 90, and just your thoughts around targets and measures. So with that, we'll call it. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and see y'all soon.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.